Okay, everyone, welcome back from lunch and welcome back to this extremely cold room. We're going to get started with self-driving cars and the law and disruptive technology.
Okay, so to give you a little bit of bio for me, I'm like another speaker today. I'm from the other side of the pond, as you can obviously hear. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So I'm an attorney at law, so I trained as a barrister in England, and then before I moved here, I took the New York bar, but I'm also a public policy graduate from the LBJ School at UT. And for the past 13 and a half years, I've worked at the Center for Transportation Research as a full-time researcher. So for those of you who are law students here, there are all sorts of different things you can do with a law degree, I promise you. Often the law will take you in fun different ways. I'm talking to a guy at lunchtime who's a law graduate but didn't take the bar but has a great career. So there's many things you can do with this training and discipline. So I hope you can take that away from this conversation we have today as well. So self-driving vehicle laws. I could probably give you a PowerPoint of 500 slides for the next 2 weeks and we would still not be finished on a discussion in this area. But obviously it's something that everyone is seeing in the newspapers, and we're reading about it, and there are now responses that are occurring at both the federal and the state level in this country and around the world. So I'm going to give you, for the first part of this session, a little bit of a review on sort of what's what in the law, so to speak, and then Susanna's going to take sort of a deeper dive in with a real-world examples, so sort of we can play around and work with and ask questions of in a similar format.
I'll give you a law school exam question.
A law school exam question, but it'll definitely be in a similar format, I think, to the other panels here, and certainly the first panel on sort of thinking through some issues, etc. So if you're really thinking about a disruptive technology too, we've had these before. So this is the New York City Easter Parade in 1900, and I kind of call this Spot the Car, and 13 years later, the story is Spot the Horse and Buggy. So when a transformational technology comes, it happens fast. And I mean, and when I arrived here from England, I was proficient in texting, and I got here and no one was texting. And I was like, what the hell? And now everybody is embryonically attached to their cell phone. So, I mean, I've been here 15 years now. I just became a US citizen. So, I mean, the whole world has changed. And so this technology, I think, certainly offers that. And today, the first talk this morning, to hear that there are pacemakers that can communicate, that was mind-blowing for me. I'm hoping I'm never going to have a heart attack or have to have a pacemaker and it's got to communicate with someone. So that, for me, was a really interesting topic. But these disruptive technologies, when they happen, they happen. And so to give you, this is your 101 primer on autonomous vehicles. So right now, everybody is using terminology that was developed by the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's called the J3016 terminology. And essentially there are 5 levels of autonomy, including a 0 level, which is no autonomy. So cars that are on the road today, some of them have some of the technologies that you would find in level 1 or 2. Some of the simplest driving tasks, and certainly like the Tesla vehicle that probably people have read about, that certainly has some of the elements that you would find within levels 1 and 2. And in levels 1 and 2, essentially, you are still really in control of the driving functions of the car. So you can think of it, and I'm going to give you another slide, in terms of this. You've still got hands on the wheel to give you a visual if you want to think about it. When you get into level 3, that is definitely where there is a lot more automated components that are actually driving the vehicle, and where you really will be in a more hands-off. And the only time you will probably interact is if an emergency occurs and you have to take control of the vehicle again. Levels 4 and 5, you're really not in control. And certainly at level 5, that is the area that you would envisage in which there is no steering wheel and no pedals in your vehicle. So really kind of futuristic in terms of, you know, where we are today and where we could be. And so this is a diagram that the NHTSA put together, but actually this came out of a consulting group, I think out of England, in a white paper they put out a couple of years ago. But I think this is the other thing with some of these technologies, is being able to translate complex technology terms through attorneys to the real world. So I like this visual from that perspective because I think most people can intuitively understand it. And so at the moment, like I said, there are a couple of test vehicles out there that are probably level 5, but we're still on, you know, hands on the wheel kind of 10 to 2 kind of position, etc. And in terms of what's been going on here in the North American continent, Google got the first test license in Nevada, and Nevada was the first state to put anything from a statutory perspective for us. And so they were the first legislature to put some law into place, and then they were followed by California and Michigan and Florida. And then some of the what are called the TNCs, the Transportation Network Companies, you've probably read about them, they are testing out. So, for example, Uber in Pittsburgh are testing. And then Uber left California because they felt California was being too onerous from both a regulation and a statutory perspective, and they went to Arizona, who were kind of like, the door's open, come here. But pretty much everybody has some kind of skin in the game with this, from your traditional what are called OEMs, which is original equipment manufacturer, through to the technology companies and the specific software developers, etc. And that's another thing, probably, if you are interested in this world, get used to acronyms, because there are a ton of them. On a project that Susanna and I are working on, our acronyms at the beginning of our first technical memo ran to 6 pages. I mean, it's just humongous. So this is something, and it will be probably within any technology and area you're going to be working in. Get used to reading in acronyms. You'll soon become proficient, and you'll forget to explain them to people. So also, if either of us say something and you don't know who the hell or what we're talking about, just put your hand up and we'll explain. And so federal level, I'm going to start with first. So US Congress. So they have been putting bills in since about 2015. Most of them sort of clear out of an initial committee area and come onto the floor and get voted out, but then they haven't moved anywhere further forward. But there is stuff happening right now. So this new Self-Drive Act, it's passed out of the House. And NHTSA is the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency. And so it's requiring them to promulgate rules on what are called safety assessment certifications. So these are certifications that the car companies will give to say that their vehicle meets the current federal standards that are required of vehicles. That was based essentially too on the fact that at the time NHTSA was requiring this, and then as this bill was introduced, NHTSA issued new policy in this month that said now it's all going to be voluntary. So this will be changing as you see this bill, and it's a very dynamic space from that perspective. It is also requiring cybersecurity plans. The bill also has some components in it within how many of these vehicles can be sold in year 1, in year 2, in year 3. So the bill is premised on the supposition that there is going to be deployment of vehicles at this high level as you're reading through it. So, and then the Senate did issue some sort of, I call them principles, which is how they describe them, and they cover these 4 areas here that you see in the bulleted points. And then now the Senate has a bill that's called the AV START. I'd have to go back and look on my cell phone to tell you what the START stands for, but every bill has this, series of acronyms from the titles. So here it is, AV START Act. And so they do also put some definitions in there on what they call highly automated vehicles. Yes, sir.
Are you going to provide these slides?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I couldn't read
They might be on the website too.
them. Okay,
And
thank you.
there's a lot of dense legal stuff, so just, you can look at them later.
Yeah. No, we'll provide, and they're on the desktop on this machine so that they can be PDF'd and sent to everybody. But in terms of thinking about what is a highly automated vehicle, that is level 3 and above. That's sort of where industry is sitting and where the engineers are taking us. And so, again, it's requiring all sorts of different components within it, but this is now changing. So this is the terrible thing about putting a PowerPoint together right now in this area. You do a PowerPoint on Wednesday and you spend 2 hours working with your colleague to put your presentation together. On Thursday, there's something else happening, and this morning, there's probably something else. So everything in here, be understanding, it's fluid and dynamic. So, and in terms of federal agencies, so obviously the United States Department of Transportation, NHTSA, as everyone calls it, the federal FTC, the FCC, they have been working within this realm in different areas and elements. But NHTSA's really been the main agency that's really been out there crafting policy. And so they had an initial policy in 2013. It was updated in 2016, and now it's just been updated this last month. Although I will say the documents have got smaller as they've gone along and as they've sort of taken a more hands-off approach. And that is one discussion that's now bubbling up on, is if they don't come out there and regulate, where does preemption fall on this from how the states are viewing how they want to handle this? So there's going to be a beautiful legal discussion on that, and there will certainly be work out there for those of you who, if that is something that you're interested in, So there'll be plenty of work for many people too. And so this is the 2016 policy. And that was kind of game-changing. The 2013 policy, NHTSA had its own set of definitions. And so the first piece of work I did on everything Wendy Wagner and I here in the law school did, we'd have to say, well, this is for the 2013 definitions that NHTSA has, but this is if you're thinking about it from the Society of Automotive Engineers. So luckily, there was some coming together of minds, and NHTSA adopted these definitions, and I think that was really important for the states, so the states could also start putting that into their legislation. And within this, they did outline what they classed to be, federal versus state roles, and it fell within the traditional realms that you would think about. So the states would be involved in, how do you get a driver's license? How do you register your vehicle? Torts and liability for injuries and accidents. And essentially, they also recommended that every state sort of identify a lead person. But they said we're going to hold preemption authority for essentially notice on the safety of the vehicles, the design of the vehicles, the manufacture of the vehicles, which has been the traditional role for the past 100 years. So, and then within this, they did start to put together things about vehicle certification of these vehicles, because some of them will look dramatically different to vehicles we're in now. And then they had sort of put a 13-step area of things that they felt needed more, as they called it, policy evolution. So listed these out here for you as well. So again, they were starting to move within this realm. And then they actually put a framework together. I'm sorry, it's kind of blurry, this framework. Every time you try and cut that from the PDF, it's always blurry. I had my person in my office at CTR she does all of our graphics, and we just couldn't get it to work, so we've left it as it is. So, and then this is the 2016 policy that was issued on cybersecurity. And it said autonomous vehicles, but when you read the preamble in the policy, it said we are also thinking of this for all vehicles, because some of the cars that are on today do have some connectivity. So if you think about it, GM's OnStar, that does connect up through the cloud to somewhere. So they were thinking about putting that in place for day. And they were, I think they had definitely spoken to some of the tech people in how they had drafted this, because some of it did read like an engineer had put some kind of oversight over this. But they were sort of looking at doing a layered approach, and then they wanted written policies, and they wanted the OEMs to be involved. So there definitely has been dialogue and discourse backwards and forwards. And if you read some of the bills, there definitely are some sentences where you can see an attorney wrote this, but no, an engineer wrote that when you read it through. So, and then we have the new 2017 policy. It's voluntary again. NHTSA has chosen not to regulate. And again, they're really looking at safety elements. A couple of things that were really new that they put in this bill or in this policy was they were really thinking about what happens after an incident, so they're calling it post-crash, ADS behavior. And so really sort of thinking about, can the vehicle, if it's fully automated, drive you and take you to a safe spot and come to a safe stop. So sort of talking about that things. There are other things that would happen at the state level, which is there actually are, in most state regulations, there's a duty that if you're involved in an incident and someone's hurt, you actually have a duty to render aid. So this also, I think, lays the groundwork for the states to be able to rework that kind of internal regulation to align up with this. And then they'd also put in a little bit about data recording, because again, as the discussion has been earlier on today on holding data and using data, and when we can or cannot have access to data and the privacy in our data, starting to think about that. But that also still, I think, falls as more of a state role from some of that. And the states have, like most of the states have had what are called EDR regulations, which are electronic data recorders. Virtually all modern vehicles have those, and it records telemetric data so that if you have an accident, it can be downloaded. And states have different some go from 30 seconds, some up to 90 seconds. But starting to put that into the discussion at the federal level as well. And then other agency activities, so FTC, they've been sort of holding workshops. So they are looking at privacy and security issues. And then the Federal Communications Commission is really going to be involved in essentially what I would call the cloud component of this and where and how data moves. And so there are different parts of the spectrum that are used by different communication users. So this one part that they opened up, it was specifically to enable the sensors that will be on these vehicles to work a little bit better and to have a little bit more bandwidth to work with. There's another part of the spectrum that essentially the communication companies want to be, it's currently closed for safety reasons. They want that open so that they can provide data streaming and entertainment and information into these vehicles. So currently that hasn't been opened up, and that is going to be, I think, the next sort of policy fight we see coming up on the Hill. And then FMCSA is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So they held a listening workshop in Georgia in April for the trucking community. It was quite a frustrating thing to listen to because there were lots of questions and there were no answers. And I think people are frustrated by that, but this is a wholly new area, kind of like the cyborg area. It's something we're starting to get our heads wrapped around, but we don't have all the answers. So, but it was interesting to listen to. And so, from the state's perspective now, moving to the states, there have been sort of three approaches. Your very traditional statutory component, providing an agency authority to regulate, and an agency regulates. Then there's sort of been a framework approach, and it's a very kind of loosely worded bill, but sort of to really provide freedom. And then there are other places where I would just say it's ad hoc pilot testing, or there may be an executive order that comes down from a governor or from a city mayor or a county judge, etc. So that's sort of, it's gone in sort of three different ways thus far. And so here your initiator states. So post this presentation, you'll be able to go and read a little bit more about these. And we gave you the state and the bill number and the year so you can find it easily. So here is California and Florida, their initiation, I call it their initiation language, so to speak. And then moving to the next one, a couple more in Florida too, as they've been sort of amending their language. So in 2016, they had some amending language that came in. So you'll be seeing that as you look through bills. And then here we've got Michigan. Michigan did a big block of 4 bills late last year. And so they really are moving ahead. But they are definitely staying in an approach that we're going to go straight to deployment. We're not going to require pilot testing and licensing of that pilot testing, which California went that way. So, as I said, different trajectories that they are working on. And then this is Nevada, and Nevada's also done some amendments. And they basically authorized their state Department of Motor Vehicles to essentially do the licensing of this. So sort of somewhat similar to California, but they did not write quite as much regulation as California wrote. California's is pretty long when you read it. So, and then California put in a very robust pilot program where the entities had to register, and then they had to prove that, the driver of the vehicle understood the vehicle's operation, and that they could always bring it to a safe stop, and they were required to provide essentially data for what were called disengagements. So this doesn't mean that there was a crash. It just means that the automated part of the system disengaged for some reason. And for some of these, people have probably seen YouTube videos. People deliberately drive in front of, the Google car. But some of it was where the sensor had maybe seen an animal in the road and so brought the vehicle to a stop as well. And so I gave you just some stats from essentially, this was their November 2016 report on the incidents that they did. If you go to the California DMV website, they've probably now updated this. They said they were going to do, so hopefully they will have updated. But they're giving data. So that's the other thing too, is we are gathering some data on what this landscape is starting to look like. So big picture now of where we are on state activities. There are about 21 states that have something in play. And this is a picture that's coming from the National Conference of State Legislators, and they're tracking this. And if you go onto their website and you hit on transportation, you'll get autonomous vehicles. They also have a database associated with this where you can go and look at the bills, etc. So it's another good resource site. And again, I've gone through in this PowerPoint for you, and I've kind of put where bills were, if they've passed, if they didn't pass, just to give you an idea and some of the components within it. And probably the biggest thing right now is everybody's using slightly different terminology. So you'll hear from autonomous vehicles to automated vehicles to highly automated vehicles to connected and automated vehicles to highly automated vehicles. So I think at some stage, hopefully, we'll have some better descriptors being used across the board, which I think will be easier.
In your interpretation, are all of them the same?
Well, if you ask the engineer, so the lead engineer who is from Mercedes-Benz, who is the chair of the J3016 committee, she was at a conference last year, and she said she strongly objects to us using the term autonomous vehicles. because she says from an AI perspective, from an engineering perspective, that would indicate that the vehicle has autonomy over itself and that the vehicle could choose to do something for pure pleasure. So I'm an English person. My car could choose to go and have afternoon tea with a friend. So that's how I think of it in my English brain, if you know what I mean. And so she was very explicit. She said she wanted everybody to be using automated vehicle. Yes, sir.
That reminds me of objection to ride sharing when it was first being debated in different places because they felt like it wasn't really a shared ride at all. It wasn't a carpool, so they came up with TNC.
Yes.
Which then you have to re-educate everybody all over again what a TNC was since the public already understood what ride sharing was.
I know, and someone asked me, oh, is that the TNZ sign? No, TNC.
Right.
So,
So the public hears of common
Yes.
vehicles throughout all the media, so
Mhm.
try to change it to something else.
yes. So, I mean, so that's why I've now gone to just self-driving cars to try and like find a middle ground between the engineers and where we are now. And I think people can, I think I'm trying to also, in terms of a public education component, I think we have a duty to be able to doing that, you know, give clear messaging and help people work their way through it, because this is very complex. So I'm going to quickly breeze through these because I want to give enough time to talk about what are some of the issues occurring, because there are many. So as you'll see, lots of states, different bills. Some bills are tiny and some bills are getting larger, and sort of really trying to define this all out. But I didn't want to bore you with a ton of slides of legislation. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. Are these states, do they actively have testing by self-driving cars, or are these legislatures kind of trying to entice self-driving to come to their communities?
Some are trying to entice. If you ask some of the technology companies, they will tell you they've looked at states. So, for example, here in Texas, they will tell you, we've looked at the statute and the regulations in Texas, and we can drive these vehicles. They're legal. And so on another piece of legislation, or piece of research that we're working on, we've basically said if you're a DMV, you should really do an audit of your code and just first of all determine who's the driver. So, but yes, there's definitely some work within that. And if you look as well, I mean, the lobbyists and the companies, they're involved in the crafting of these bills, because you can read it in the way some of the things are crafted and how liability is being constructed, and other elements of that. So, but definitely, and some states, they want it to happen because it will bring those companies there and it's jobs and economic development. So there's definitely a role that that's playing in this. So, but I'm trying not to bore you with going through every slide and reading everything. I don't believe in reading to you. I believe probably most of you have a degree so you can read. But you can see just how much is going on. And it really is a watch this space from that perspective. And so here in Texas, we did have a couple of bills that came out this last session. So one was on following distances, which is really being focused in on truck platooning, which will be where more than one truck will be connected to a lead truck, and that lead truck will be controlling the braking and the functions of the trucks behind it. So that was really targeted in at that. I'm struggling with what is reasonable distance behind, because we're all different in our perceptions and how we view things and how we drive. And then the Senate Bill 2005 that came out, it was kind of a sleeper bill. I was tracking stuff, but it kind of popped up out of nowhere. I think this was definitely written by the companies and how it was written, and there are problems within it. So, and in another piece of work I'm doing with Wendy Wagner, we're probably going to pull this to pieces in that, and you'll be seeing that coming out in our piece of work, which will be another year. We still have another year to run on it, but we're going to start to pull apart some of these things and sort of show the flaws, hopefully just to set the policy direction in place and so people can see where some improvements can be made. So, and then there are some executive orders out there. So this was Washington's role. So again, some states are taking this sort of tangent, not even involving legislatures and not really thinking about putting regulation. And I would definitely say this is what you would call the business-friendly approach to encouraging this to happen. And obviously Washington just so happens to be where some major technology companies are located as well. So, you do wonder where that's driving from that perspective. But that's what I think. That's my personal opinion. So, and to give you a quick sort of review on my takeaways, there are about 21 states now. It may be 22 if things have passed on a couple of other states. It depends whether they come through. A lot of people are involved in this. It probably is going to happen. Whether or not you and I own one of these vehicles, we might be a way off on that. But certainly Ford and GM have said they want to have fleets of essentially vehicles that you could then, order for hire, so to speak. So it would kind of be like a TNC They are looking in around the 2020, 2022 range, and they are partnering with Lyft and with Uber. So I think we'll be seeing some components on that. My biggest thing right now is I think we need consistency in nomenclature and terminology, because I think it's easy from a public policy discourse. Congress hasn't yet fully passed out legislation, although I'm hopeful they will put something out there. I think we need it. And I wrote here, NHTSA and FCC are moving forward, and my hope is that they will continue to move forward along with other federal agencies to do this. And that's the end of my presentation. So I think I'll leave any other further questions for the end and let Susanna come up and dive on in. I'm going to close this out, Susanna. No? So you must be on.
It's in the flash drive. Oh, no, it's on the desktop.
Yes. You just tap up and down.
The up and down, okay. Hi, I'm Susanna Galloon. I'm a transportation consultant and an attorney, and I went to law school here, and then I went to law school in England with Lisa. That's where we met. And then I dragged her back to Texas, where she can't find decent British tea. I'm going to talk about the emerging legal issues with automated vehicles, not autonomous, as she said, even though if you do an internet search, it'll be autonomous. So Lisa found this great picture for me. You can tell how futuristic these cars are just by looking at the picture.
From Disney's Expo
Yeah.
in '56.
None of them are driving. They're just having a good time. Okay, so here are some of the areas of law that AVs will affect. Federal preemption, I'm going to get into the weeds on that. Transportation laws, as she said, sovereign immunity, liability, tort case law, products liability, insurance law especially, cybersecurity law, data breach laws, administrative law, patent law, privacy law is a big one, criminal law, constitutional law, and contracts law. Luckily, I don't have enough time to cover all of this. So she showed you the levels. The different colors are for a reason. So 0 through 2 is considered not really automated, not highly automated at least. Tesla is level 2. It means humans should be paying attention and should be looking at the road. The man who died in the Tesla crash last year wasn't looking at the road, and NHTSA ruled that there was absolutely no defect at all with his system. The defect was with the user, apparently. So level 3 is the one that engineers consider very dangerous because the human has to pay attention because the human is the backup plan. It's called the handoff period, when the car will give you a warning and then the human has to be able to push the button in time to stop whatever's happening and take over. And that is the dangerous zone that we are especially focused on because in 10 years, these cars are going to be on the road with you and your regular car. And you're going to have to be dealing with these level 3s with some guy who thinks he can read the newspaper while he's going to work when actually he can't and he shouldn't. But you're going to be driving in the lane next to this level 3, probably. If anybody can afford it, that is. Okay, so the terms to know. These terms are kind of new. They didn't show up in 2013. They showed up around 2016 when the engineers said, hey, maybe we should talk to the feds because they don't really know what they're doing. So these are mainly engineering terms that came out of the research, but now they're in legislation, and as she said, at least 15 to 17 states at least. So because the feds were hands-off, the states decided to make their own legislation because the feds were not helping at all, and they needed help. So ADS is the Automated Driving System. The system is separate from the technology. There was actually a little bit of a turf war between Uber and the TNCs and the manufacturers because the development companies like Google and Apple, and then there's a guy named George Hotz with a company called Comma.ai with an add-on kit. So you can turn your little, Datsun into an autonomous vehicle if you have a little add-on kit. So they had different interests from the manufacturers, and both sides had very highly paid lobbyists that were trying to push for legislation. So that was an early on turf war happening with legislation. DDT, that's my acronym for Dynamic Driving Task. So the task of driving is being split up legally into operational and tactical functions that the system handles. The human is going to be handling the strategic aspects, which means basically destination. Tesla Level 2 It states in the law, and I think even in their manual, that it cannot handle all aspects of the dynamic driving task. So if you look at that, that colorful blue-green slide that we had earlier, level 2 doesn't talk about dynamic driving task. So operator, this is the biggest question of the day. Is the operator human or not? In level 3, you require a human. Many of the state laws have no levels expressly stated at all, which is a problem, and it's going to be a huge problem for the manufacturer as well, but also law enforcement. So, and these are, we have a list of states, but Nevada has level 4 and 5 delineated in the law. Texas does not, as we'll see. Colorado, the law for HAVs does not apply to 0 through 3 at all. Let's see. Other terms to know, fully automated vehicle, that's going to be level 4 or 5. And there's just an example of the North Carolina legislation that has the definition written into it. You'll notice that it says the system that this car will not at any time require an occupant to perform any portion of the dynamic driving task when the automated driving system is engaged. So, and then the engineers wanted to make sure that the stupid human would not be involved. So it said that, you know, the equipment that allows an occupant to perform any portion of the dynamic driving task is installed. It must be stowed or made unusable. So they don't even want the human touching the controls in level 4 and 5. Operational design domain. This is important for especially products liability attorneys. It means there's a description of the specific operating domains in which an automated driving system is designed to effectively operate, including but not limited to the geographic limitations, roadway types, speed range, and environmental conditions, i.e. weather. Something that happened in the Tesla accident, the bright, bright sky and the sun was white, and so was the side of a tractor trailer. The car could not distinguish between the white sky and the white tractor trailer, and that is why I believe the driver was decapitated by the tractor trailer, right? Yeah, I think he went under the tractor trailer. So that's why he died. Manufacturers are carefully carving out protections for themselves in the case of product liability lawsuits. What conditions is your AV designed for? We don't know. Maybe it can't handle fog. Maybe it can't handle snow, sleet. We don't know.
I would even argue too, what's going to be critical in this is we're going to need our states to be able to make sure that lines are painted on the road and continue to be updated.
Yeah, will it be able to will it be able to see a faded lane line?
Faded lane line, potholes, and even though...
Oh, a stop sign covered in graffiti. Will it be able to read that?
Yeah. So,
We don't know.
Or a stop sign that maybe has, like some of the ones that have the LED lights where they're multiples and they're coming out, will it be able to see that?
Yeah.
Road signs covered by vegetation, which I'm sure you've all seen.
But for $250,000, I'm sure somebody will sell you an AV.
Yes.
Okay, so here's a real crash scenario. It could even be a great law school exam question. So, highway crash scenario. There's a 15-year-old minor with a broken leg, enters a level 3 AV to go to his tutor's house. He plays around and watches YouTube on the phone, doesn't watch the road. The AV encounters a construction zone in rush hour. There's a flagger standing there in the fog. The AV cannot change lanes in time very easily. The AV hits the flagger and then stops. The minor cannot exit the AV without help. The police arrive. Who gets the ticket? Why? Which laws apply? State law, federal law, and who gets the liability for the accident? Does anybody know the answer? That's good, because the people in the hearings we went to didn't know the answer either. That was hearings at the Capitol. Okay, so first question. The boy, is he licensed? Technically, no. He has a limited license, a learner's permit, because he's 15. So there was no adult in the car. Licensing is traditionally a state law role, not a federal role, although the new bill in the Senate wants to control what types of licenses will be issued for minors, the disabled, and the elderly. So that's a big preemption fight that is beginning. Is the boy the driver? This is the biggest question of the day. Who's the driver? So under Texas law, the system holds the license to drive. Although Texas law has no references to the SAE levels by number, so level 3, which I'm sure in the manual will say that the human attention is required, there is a handoff problem, and the human was supposed to be paying attention and was supposed to be ready to take over in the case of a handoff. Was the 15-year-old responsible enough to handle the handoff? Not if he was watching YouTube. So, and this whole lack of having a level written into the law is not going to help the manufacturer very much in a products liability lawsuit, especially if they included a level in their manual and then the law did not include it in the law. So, and then I've already talked about Colorado and Tennessee have named levels. And actually there is in the Senate bill right now, they name the levels in a new term, yet another term, dedicated HAV. So under Texas law, the system owner is the operator. So isn't mom lucky? So with regard to traffic law compliance, the owner is going to be the operator, regardless of whether the person is physically present in the vehicle while it's operating. So there could be a strict liability crime there. The mom wasn't even in the car, but the mom will be held. The mom will get the traffic ticket, most likely. This law was written to allow remote operation, which is something that the TNCs really wanted, because the TNCs want to do away with the human driver, and they want to be able to remotely operate their Ubers and Lyfts. And also the manufacturers are going to introduce their own fleets similar to Uber as well, and that's why they have a finger in this pie as well. The traffic violation. Do we know what the traffic violation is? I don't know. Will the police know? How will law enforcement know what to do? And who will get the ticket for driving, the mom, the boy, or the system? It looks like the mom in this case, although there is some, the government also needs to take care of its construction worker. Who will the insurance find responsible? That's going to be a big, complicated mess. So must the HAV notify law enforcement and EMS and seek aid for strangers after the crash? This is a tort, more or less, but it's been written into law. So there's a reasonable care standard will be applied to the system and its automatic crash notification technology, the minor who is the operator, and then the remote owner who is probably mom or dad. So under Texas law, the vehicle or the human operator shall comply with Chapter 550 in the Texas Transportation Code, which is basically, it's a lot of post-crash behavior rules about what you're supposed to do after you have a crash. So, that whole exchanging information, making sure people aren't injured, making sure the police are helping, those kind of things.
Now I have a question. What happens if two highly automated vehicles have a crash and there's the kid in the car? Who changes what information and who tells the vehicle?
Well, obviously the automated vehicle can't leave a note on the dashboard or write down an address. So that's going to be really interesting.
Sorry to ask you a question.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure the police don't even know the answer to that one, and they're not being trained on it either.
I took a course last Christmas. I was working on another project for Texas on a thing called specialized hauling vehicles. It's a subset of trucks, and they have to do some requirements on bridge formula to the Federal Highway Administration. So I had to take this course to learn how to weigh a truck so that then I could do the legal analysis in this piece of research. And for 5 days, those law enforcement officers harangued me. They were from all over the state because they were all asking me, how am I going to determine probable cause? How will they know the vehicle's autonomous? Will it be in the VIN number? Is there going to be some data information? Because currently they run on the supposition when they pull a car over that there's a driver. Well, if there's no driver, they will immediately think the driver's absconded, so they'll go and hunt for the driver, so they'll waste time. So every lunchtime, I was bombarded with questions, and I didn't feel like I answered things, but we've kind of worked things through. But there is, like I said, there's a whole gamut of areas that we haven't even covered in this that have got to be thought through. So there will be good work for you technology lawyers.
Many questions.
Yes.
Sorry.
So on the other hand, though, when you have one or more autonomous vehicles involved in an accident, there's going to be a lot more crash data that's collected, and we won't be necessarily have to rely on humans to remember what happened or report it accurately. We have a great accident investigation tool. It's not all grim. It seems to me that there are some upsides, and also when it comes to exchanging information, it's not a
And the nice thing is that 15-year-old who is watching YouTube, what if he was watching porn when the accident happened?
that probably there right now.
Yes.
What do the police do then? Oh, and it's all recorded for mom to know about, too.
That's irrelevant. The other thing is that the vehicles can exchange information to the right way. I mean, that's not too hard to imagine that they will exchange that and send emails to the owner saying your vehicle has just been in an accident.
Yeah.
And call the authorities, et cetera, et cetera.
That is my hope.
Yeah.
But my hope is that they don't also end up in your third-party doctrine area in
Yeah.
which they decide for a public policy reason they don't want to release that data unless there is essentially a warrant to search and release the data. Yes, more questions.
All right. Back there?
Are there any laws on the books about what would render your autonomous vehicle illegal to drive? So, for example, do you have to keep your system up to date at all times? So, like, Windows pushes updates to my computer all the time. Like,
No laws at all, but the manufacturers are just dying to take liability for that. I don't know why. I really don't know why. Okay, I'll just keep going for a little bit here. So we're talking about these mixed traffic AV crashes. What are the limitations of technology? The AV sensors and the cameras have trouble, we know, recognizing pedestrians, flaggers, crossing guards, and they cannot read body language, which it really makes four-way stops in school zones really fun because I read a story about how the cameras cannot predict the behavior of a kangaroo. Well, you know, I bet the cameras can't predict the behavior of a 4-year-old either. Just throwing that out there. Have you ever seen a 4-year-old in a school zone? I mean, it's like trying to catch a fly. It's crazy. Okay, so mixed traffic. Well, the regular drivers let the AV over. There's a little bit of behavior study that needs to be happening. Can the AV merge safely without the body language and the customs? We don't know. Will the AV have ethical pre-programming? This is a huge area for engineers. I don't know if you've ever heard of the trolley problem, but the cars have to be programmed to do something correctly. So is it going to hit the pedestrian or hit the car in the next lane? That has to be programmed in. It has to figure it out. And there are many, many combinations and many, many podcasts on this. But basically the trolley problem is, who do you kill first? Do you kill the lady with the baby in the intersection, or do you kill the old man with the dog over in this intersection? So that's going to continue to be an issue. The minimal risk condition is a terminology for when the car malfunctions and has to stop. Unfortunately, in our case, it's a level 3, so there is no MRC. So the 15-year-old was supposed to handle the stopping of the car, which he did a little too late. So now the flagger is dead. Okay, other product liability issues when the manufacturer needs to watch himself. Legal terms matter in limiting liability. Will the flashing lights register as a reason to stop? That's part of the object and event detection technology that's being researched right now. The fog may make the cameras useless. We've talked about ODD. So the last clear chance doctrine of tort would apply, in which case the boy should have taken over the car, but he didn't. He had the last clear chance to do so. If the HAV decides to go back to stopping, we don't know if it's going to be stopping or malfunctioning, so we don't know if it can send the crash notification. It may not even be working after a crash. So the manufacturer's warnings in the training manual are no substitute for experience in discovering the limitations of the technology, as the driver of the Tesla found out. So, yeah, we don't need to talk about contributory negligence, probably. That's for the insurance companies to figure out. The insurance companies are going to need to examine their subrogation and property damage business models. We all know that. Crash investigations will involve federal and state law. Who owns the crash data that was recorded and who gets it? Lisa talked about the EDRs, event data recorders. They're probably in the car you're driving right now. It's like a little black box that records very limited crash data, speed, braking, acceleration, things like that. It's good to use as an analogy, and there are laws governing the ownership of that data, but also it's a very limited amount of data, and these cars are going to have big data, an outrageous amount of data, collected, used, transmitted. So can the human driver who is being filmed and GPS tracked claim any privacy rights over the information? Under state laws, much information can be made public if it is part of an accident investigation. The event data recorders, there are state laws governing that. There are breach of personal data laws by the state government that govern privacy and the release of information. But we really don't know what category this new information, it is new information. It's not just the speed of your car. It's what were you watching on YouTube. It's where were you going and how often do you go to the tutor's house. It is what time were you going there? What were the conditions of the traffic when you were doing it? The cameras can also pick up information on anybody around the car. It could pick up the drug dealer on the side of the road that was doing something right before the crash. So there's a lot more information being collected. Is the FTC ready to regulate the disclosure of big data that comes with a car full of sensors, cameras, and an internet connection? There is testimony right now on this federal bill that the FTC can't handle this and that they are not prepared to handle this. They've done a pretty weak job with regard to Google, and I've got some case sites in here for that. So we look at the consent. So far the FTC, their way of handling data is notice and choice, which you're all familiar with the privacy policies every time you agree to some app or Facebook or anything. The consent of the consumer generally favors business. There's a BMW example where there's a sensor in the car that tells that there's a kid in the car. Well, the advertisers have been pushing BMW to record how long the car's been running so that the advertiser knows to push advertisers telling the parents to go feed the child at so-and-so restaurant. And that made big news over here and in Germany. The manufacturers, the insurers, the dealers, they're going to condition the acquisition of goods and services on consent to the privacy policy, which frankly can be coercive. And as attorneys, you probably know that the consumer is in a lesser bargaining position. They generally have less power because they have less knowledge. The car manual, the privacy policies, they're generally vague, overbroad. They are changeable because it's all on the internet. Usually there's complicated legal jargon that the average person doesn't understand. NHTSA even admits so far that they have no control over third-party access, and there's a document from last year that they said that. Driverless cars are going to be storing data such as, they're going to store a lot of data, and then anyone can aggregate that data and find out exactly who you are and what day of the week you go to the strip club or the restaurant or HEB, yeah. So they're going to be storing your habits, preferences, routes. They're going to be using the sensors, cameras, real-time location data, identity theft, and stalkers are even possible. The thing about this is they have to monetize the information. That's how they're going to pay for all of their research and development. So you know they're going to sell your information somehow. And the question is, do you have a table? Do you have a place at the table on this legislation? And so far, well.
I was actually going to ask a question of the cyborg panel from this morning.
Yeah.
Is the AV kind of like an avatar extension of us potentially, if we owned it? Because
There's some discussion about if you think of your cyborg body getting more and more enhanced over time, right? Does a point come where you can consider yourself as an occupant or a driver or a passenger within your own body, because it also will have autonomous aspects to it. You know, I mean, think of the way a pilot flies a jetliner, a jet plane. They call that flying by wire, right? He basically requests that the plane turn right, and then the computer decides exactly how to do that. And so arguably, we will start interacting with our own systems the same way. And so, yes, there's a lot of connections that can be drawn between autonomous cars and autonomous bodies.
Okay. I have a little bit of an allergy problem. So the FTC so far has been kind of toothless with regard to third-party data. There's the Joffe and the Google case, where the Street View cases, where the car was driving around and they were acquiring passwords and emails from home networks while sitting out on the street, and the FTC responded, but not very strongly. This is a famous third-party case. It's called INRI US for historical cell site data. So the driver's GPS records, which was historical location data, were considered business records since the driver's locations were voluntary voluntarily shared with the cellular service company. And the company just handed the records over to the police when asked for them. So the question was, do you have a Fourth Amendment right to privacy in obtaining these cell phone generated location records? And the court just said, you don't need a warrant, no probable cause is necessary under this federal law, the Stored Communications Act, because the cell users made a choice to make the call. And they kind of knew that this information was being retained somewhere. So here's another privacy case. Jones, which is kind of a different deal, and these don't apply to autonomous vehicles necessarily. They might, but this didn't exist yet. The technology wasn't there. So this is really a GPS case. Law enforcement was surveilling a suspected drug dealer. The police put the GPS device on the car. That was key. Police used the travel patterns and behavior of the suspect to find the drug stash. It was definitely government surveillance, not third party. The real-time and continuous location information from the GPS was shared with law enforcement, despite there being no warrant and consent. Jones claimed he could not be anonymous in driving around, so the targeted and warrantless surveillance was found unconstitutional. How would this case apply to an automated vehicle? We don't know yet. And I'm going to go over the federal bill just a little bit. The preemption issue is huge, and there's a lot of testimony being taken right now in the Senate. Preemption, for all you 1Ls, if the federal government or Congress has enacted legislation on a subject matter, such as the safety standards for NHTSA, it shall be controlling over state laws and or preclude the state from enacting laws on the same subject. So historically, the states regulate driver behavior, registration, licensing, insurance, traffic laws, and driver's ed. The feds traditionally have regulated like the vehicle's design, safety recalls, notice, defects, those kinds of things. This is the big question of the day. If the driver is the vehicle, who regulates the vehicle? Who regulates the highly automated vehicle? If the driver behavior is actually the car's behavior, there's a blurring of the lines. How do you regulate it, and who's going to? So one example is the vehicle safety standards are considered a federal area, but the states inspect your car. So why is that? Transportation expert, why is that? Well, in this case, the states are deputized to handle something that the feds cannot or don't want to do, which is a lot of environmental regulation. And that is a possible model because so far the feds have proven inept at handling what's coming at them. So some of the testimony to the Senate right now is saying, hey, if you really can't handle this, give it to the states, deputize them, and let them help you figure this problem out. So as Lisa talked about, the two bills, Senate and House, the House bill passed. The Senate is currently debating things, so it's not law yet, and I don't know if it will be. So under the House bill, they say that no state may make any law or regulation regarding the design, construction, or performance of highly automated vehicles, automated driving systems, or components of automated driving systems. That's another piece of the picture is you don't have just manufacturers, you have tech companies and component people, you have the parts suppliers, and they are being less protected in most legislation we're seeing. The House bill involves exempting a large number of vehicles during testing from any standards whatsoever. There's a preemption question there that if there is no federal standard for AVs, how can you have preemption? Because the feds did not act. If the feds do not act, the states can handle the arena. So, and also the House bill says that the system it's defining the system as hardware and software, but software and cybersecurity standards often fall into the privacy realm, which is considered a state role. So, I think I can skip that one. All right, so how are we on time? Are we done? Are we getting kicked out? All right. Well, let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We can wrap it up. Any questions?
I have a political question. So, it seems to me that this really can't come to full force until the insurance industry signs off on it one way or another. I mean, they're a fairly powerful force in and of themselves. Do we have any indication of what they're seeking in terms of all these regulations?
They've been caught flat-footed. Many of the state bills provide, states kind of knew, oh, hey, we have to include some insurance provision in these new laws. Let's throw $5 million, a $5 million bond per car on these testing vehicles. And in California, that was unpopular.
And in California, California put draft regulations out in March as a way of addressing all the criticisms they had received from their initial regulations. They haven't enacted those yet. And in those, they even had the $5 million bond for a deployed vehicle. So that's a lot more, theoretically, insurance we would have to carry. I did speak to both State Farm and AAA in phase 1 of my piece of research I did for TechStop. And I had two-hour conversations with each of them that were entirely off the record, so I can't tell you what they said. And they were very cagey about really giving, any specifics. So my takeaway, and these were both conversations with their general counsels. So, and they basically, I've continued to keep them looped into things because they said you seem to know what's going on and doing that. So from time to time I send them a useful piece of information to keep that door open. But I think that's someone that's we've really got to think through.
I see a bright future in
Yes.
insurance law and
Yes.
subrogation claims.
And the UK has, UK introduced a bill before the election last year. They've reintroduced it, and they have really detailed out essentially contributory negligence and how they're looking at that and how they're thinking the insurance industry should react to it. But that bill, it's made it through the House of Commons, but it's over in the House of Lords, but it hasn't come out of the House of Lords. So, Sweden has got something in play, and Germany has something in play, and Australia has something in play. So there are other jurisdictions, some of which are common law like we are, in which there's definitely areas where we can take a look to. But it is just going to be purely statutory because there's no case law anywhere in the world on this. In fact,
They're going to rely on common law a
we're
lot.
going to rely on common law for the beginning until we have some cases come through. And
But
probably
also the insurance companies are going to have to change their business model because they're
Yes.
not going to have the personal injury stuff anymore. What they're going to have is crazy property damage and crazy complex products liability lawsuits.
It's going to change that. And I think it will even change actually the legal industry. So the mum and pops that, we go
The
to
PI attorneys need to find something else to
be
do.
different, yeah. And so, there are other industries that are going to be impacted too. The airline industry, because I kind of think if you could be in one of these vehicles to travel to Dallas, are you going to fly to Dallas anymore, or are you going to use it? Use an automated vehicle or a shared automated vehicle.
Mhm.
And some transit agencies will be impacted, I think.
We didn't even talk about the Jeep hacking, where Chrysler had to recall about 80,000 Jeeps after these white hat technology people made it public that they could take over the telematics
If you go to
remotely.
if you go to Wired magazine, you can see the video, and it was done in Chicago on the highways. And the video it's really scary when you watch the video.
They can do it over the internet. They can stop a car on a freeway remotely on the internet.
There was one more person who had a question.
Yeah.
I think I saw a hand up.
Anyone?
I got one from your class. One of my big concerns is that we'll move forward and we'll go, this is a great idea, it makes everything say we should have this, but with the practical concerns that we raise, we say, well, the only way this works is if we say everyone has to have one. So then the manufacturer of standard cars where we control it is banned, and so everyone has to have it. But then I see that as being a huge problem because you're assuming a perfect world, you're assuming a traffic jam on Mopac, whereas there's people in rural areas where the striping's not good, you're on farmers on ranches, driving through water in Hurricane Harvey, and then all of a sudden we're kind of neutered in any sort of extreme situation because we've been.
And you've just come up with a beautiful new area that you could write a law journal article on
Yeah.
disaster
There
management
you
and
go.
autonomous.
Did you hear about Tesla updating its software on the fly during the hurricane in Florida? Nobody was given any notice of it, least of all the government, and they thought they were helping people get out of the hurricane zone by updating the Tesla, was it Model S? Model S software without any warning. And they were giving people all these maps and things, but what if their car had been bricked during a mandatory evacuation because the software update didn't go well? Did they think about that? Did they warn the government they were going to do this before they effected a massive mandatory evacuation of Florida?
And they basically, what they did was they gave you more battery range, so they took you up, like, you got like another 75 miles so that you could go longer without a charge. So, I mean, to their mind, they were doing good, but then there are all these other issues that go along with it.
Yeah, the power of controlling a massive amount of cars of the same model at the same time, I can tell you Homeland Security is super interested in that. Let's just shut down every, Ford Escape in the entire city of Austin, bam, with one stroke of a PC button.
And your point about the changing models, currently, so in Texas currently, the fleet vehicle turnover rate is about 13 years. So most of us on average are owning our vehicle for 13 years. So if you've just bought your vehicle and that you've paid a lot of money for, it's going to be a while before you're going to say, well, I'm going to go and buy a brand new vehicle and take on potentially another car payment. So that's the other thing, is figuring out, where this is going to pitch. And that's why I think the personal vehicles for you and me are longer out in terms of, rapid deployment and deployment penetration rates, which were up, above 10%. Because there are always the folks who follow technology, they're the people that get the first brand new model of a new phone, and every other types of technology. So there are those people out there, and then there are people like me. I class myself as the very, 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 very late follower. So, and I look at it, my vehicle.
Some people might say dinosaur.
So I am a dinosaur. I'm a Luddite. I freely admit that. I'm an English Luddite. There you go. But my Toyota Prius is 10 years old. I'm going to drive that puppy till it dies. I'm on my third battery. I know how to put a battery in a Prius. If you own a Prius, I'm your girl to come to. But there are so many other complex things, and we probably came across as negative in this. I think it's just there are so many.
The scariest period, I think, is when we have mixed traffic.
Mixed traffic, yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
My prayer is we go straight to level 5 and we miss that middle part. But to get to that level 5, we have to be in the level 3 and the 4 part. I think, if nothing else, for the artificial intelligence to start to learn not only driving habits on a road, but all the pedestrians on the side, suddenly a dog running out of the street, how children behave on a road, how the elderly may interact. How do you work on a road where many of our streets don't have sidewalks? So when I walk home from the bus every day, I walk a little bit on the sidewalk and then I'm walking in the street. So all these things that the software and the artificial intelligence has got to learn and be programming through a learned process with the algorithms.
Try picturing a 4-way stop in mixed traffic.
Yeah. So, but for those of
You go. No, you go. No, you go.
So but those of you who are at law school, if you're looking for a career, Alex, I know you're looking for a career. I mean,
Insurance law.
There's going to be a good career in technology, without a doubt.
Patent law.
Yeah.
Trademarks.